You're listening to the PropTech Pioneers podcast. This podcast brings startups and MLSs closer together by exploring the beauty and the struggle of real estate data and technology. I believe real estate is on the cusp of a major transformation driven by better access to data, a new crop of pragmatic founders, and pent-up frustration with the status quo. These are conversations with those pioneers that are leading that transformation within the MLS landscape. I'm your host, Evan Knowles. I'm an entrepreneur building a fintech company called Simba that helps realtors manage their financial health using MLS data. And I wish I had access to these conversations earlier in my journey. So I thought I'd help future entrepreneurs and MLS executives learn from each other in a more open and accessible fashion. I hope you enjoy. Now let's jump into it. All right, I'm sitting down with Zach Gorman with BHR. I'm looking forward to this conversation. We connected on LinkedIn. I think I posted maybe one of these episodes or a piece of content that Zach liked. I looked at his profile. I've come across it previously through Bill Fowler or somebody, but I saw that you got into Modern Ventures Passport Program, which is a big accomplishment. And then we jumped on a Zoom call, chatted, and we have a lot of similar thoughts about the space and things we want to accomplish. So I thought it'd be a great episode here. You're doing great work, really cool products. So looking forward to diving into that. But this episode, really, I think we're going to be talking a lot about data, how it can be leveraged, who wants to use it, and kind of what the future looks like with AI. So Zach, thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Evan. And it was great learning more about Simba and the problems that you're addressing, because we certainly have felt those problems as well on our side. So really happy to be here.
Yeah. Let's dive in before we get into the details of BHR. Let's hear your details and your background. So how'd you get to the space? Give us that story.
Sure. I won't go too far back because it's unrelated, but I spent sort of the early part of my career in a couple different verticals. I was in management consulting for defense contractors. I actually spent about 10 years in the music industry as a recording artist, and professional musician. And then parlayed a lot of those sort of bootstrapping skills over to the tech world when I decided to move on from that. And a really close friend of mine from college, we reconnected, had always remained really close peers, but he was starting a prop tech company called Tory Homes. And I had really spent a lot of time in the music side of things, working on, design, marketing, ops, sort of all the things that make the business around the product itself. So decided to join on with James, and we started Tory in 2017. The high level on Tory was tech-enabled brokerage. We opened up in about 6 different markets, really high level, just looking to make the process of buying, selling, and owning homes easier. The way that manifested was we built some really interesting machine learning technology on the search side to help people find the right home faster, and then built a lot of internal tooling on the back end to help real estate agents do more deals. So that's sort of it.
Cool. And what did you learn about a brokerage's ability to be either a tech company or a brokerage that's enabled by tech? This is a common topic I like to talk about, is can a brokerage, with the unit economics that they have and kind of their structure and their fees and just the way that they make money, can they be a tech company? Or is it more of a services business enabled by tech, and they do the best they can to be a technology driven company? What's your take on that dialogue?
Yeah, it's a great question. I will be the first to admit that, coming at this from sort of the tech industry side first, rather than sort of, starting on the real estate side, I certainly had my assumptions of what was possible. And, many of those assumptions were proved correct, but also many of them were proved incorrect. And I think where we sort of landed is, first and foremost, real estate's always going to have a human component to it. It's incredibly important. We worked with hundreds and hundreds of buyers and sellers, and just having that having that person there for you is, critical to the process. That said, I don't think it's out of bounds to say that there are plenty of parts of the process, especially as tech continues to develop over time, that can be sort of disintermediated or at least made more efficient by technology. So I think you really need to it needs to be hand in hand. Do I ever think that there will be a solution that completely replaces the human element? Probably not at scale, no. But I do think, and we're seeing this more and more like throughout the industry, that people understand that tech is not something necessarily to be afraid of. It's something to sort of embrace and adapt with, because if anything, the hope is that tech is not just taking people's jobs. It's that it's helping enable people to do their jobs in a better way and help them specialize in the thing that they really want to do. I know plenty of real estate agents who spend 50, 60% of their time just on deal sourcing, or pipeline management. And so much of that isn't the job. That's just what you have to do the job. So I think there's going to be some middle ground.
Yeah, for sure. I think so many industries are seeing the assistant kind of come into that space. Developers, great example. There's a lot of creativity that goes into every job role that, is service based, but especially developers, especially real estate agents, attorneys, a lot of these industries where people are afraid of AI being disruptive or other technologies being disruptive. I think, if you peel back the curtain, there's a lot of human creativity and a lot of human uniqueness in those spaces, and real estate's certainly one of those.
Yeah, and
Now, yeah,
I'm sorry, just to add color to that, I just think that, more and more there's going to be a blurred line between, a services industry and a tech company. I think most businesses in sort of where we're at in this world nowadays are just going to be tech businesses because they incorporate technology. I think there's, that hard line sort of has to be broken down at some point.
yeah, and I think what we'll see as time goes on with the adoption of these AI tools is that it's really going to allow people. Again, I'm going to refer back to engineers and developers. It's going to allow people to become 10x developers. It's going to be able to be a 10x real estate agent. You're no longer going to have to maybe reply to every single text or do all of your prospecting. There's going to be ways AI can take some of that time off your plate to handle the good stuff, to
Yeah.
handle taking care of clients and spend more time there, like you said just a minute ago. So it's going to be exciting. And the agents that adopted first, the MLSs that adopted first, are going to be way, way out in front because it's a compounding effect. And we're going to
Yeah.
see
And
that.
that's very much our
So,
theme for BHR.
yeah, 100%. Now get into BHR. Tell us that origin story. How'd you go from Torrey Homes to BHR, and then give us like the elevator pitch?
Yeah, of course. So BHR is very much a product of our experience building Tori. It's to sort of start at the beginning, as we were building Tori, it's a small, scrappy company when we started out. We're just getting our feet under us. We're trying to open, in new markets, and we kept sort of encountering the same problems over and over again. And that was, mainly that real estate data was incredibly difficult to access. And, that manifests in a couple different ways. It's hard to access because there's a lot of different providers out there that you have to go get it from. It's fragmented, both geographically as well as within the verticals of data that you're looking for. So, if you need MLS market data, if you need permit data, if you need zoning data, what have you, all of that data exists in different silos. And again, it can also be geographically fragmented. So if you're looking to expand in more national level, that becomes very, very difficult. In many cases, it's also prohibitively expensive. So, you're signing enterprise contracts with could be 3-year minimums, and I'll step back and say that, I love the prop tech industry. I'm really, really passionate about it. I think a lot of people in recent years have been doing a lot of head scratching saying like, where's the value? There's been billions and billions of dollars poured in the prop tech industry. And, I think what we're seeing is a lot of the companies that got funded in sort of that big push a couple years back, a lot of that is just fintech sort of reskinned with sexy branding. And it's less about real hard technology that's being built to help, move the entire industry forward. And we're seeing the results of that now. On public markets, a lot of those firms are either completely out or they're down 90%. And, I think what we experienced as a company just starting out is indicative of why this space isn't moving forward fast enough. That, just to get your feet under you and get started, you need access to data, to build these products and services on top of it. And if that's difficult for all the reasons that I mentioned, then, in a case like ours, just an example, when we wanted to open in a new market, it took us about 6 months of back and forth just to get access to an MLS feed, a RETS feed to post a listing for sale. And, so much of the core of our product was sort of a digital web-based app, all of that stuff. And 6 months in a startup world that could be it. You could be down and out. And so it actually, becomes quite clear why the space isn't moving forward, because if you have sort of this bottleneck of just people just can't get started. So BHR was really born out of that experience that we, encountered over and over again. And so at its highest level, BHR really aims to solve the problem of real estate data fragmentation by assembling the corpus of real estate data. We're focused on residential real estate data and just making that universally accessible in real time.
Yeah, it's a frustrating problem, and especially when you're a technologist that comes into the space that, hasn't spent your career here. And, you definitely feel like an outsider. You feel like there's this group of decision makers that you've got to penetrate, and you've got to get into that group and figure out how to communicate with them effectively and get on their good side. And that's scary because in the most highly innovative industries, if you look across fintech, the developer API ecosystem with so many great tools being built, whatever industry it is that's really moving fast, AI, another example, open source, the data is there. The algorithms, the APIs are there and open for people to play with and develop products at very little cost. And then what you end up seeing is a lot of experimentation, a lot of amazing products, a lot of bad products, but the ones that are working surface and they work and they get distribution. This
Yeah.
industry is the opposite,
Right.
and
And
it's scary.
totally. And I will at least put a caveat here that I know that there's a ton of great work being done in the space,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
that is 100% true. And I've been really fortunate to meet a lot of great builders in the space. And the thing is, like, it is this sort of huge thorn in everybody's side of like, oh, we want to move faster, but people keep getting interested, they keep staying curious, and they keep wanting to build. So, I may be jumping the gun, but like looking towards the future, I'm still really optimistic about where things are headed. But, as you said, like, as an outsider coming into this industry, 6, 7 years ago, I was sort of appalled at like what I encountered. When you're talking about accessing data, there, whether it's that you're getting data in sort of unusable forms where like you need a whole technical team to implement that data, or you're going to a government website, which I'm sure anybody who's ever interacted with that understands like the kind of UI and the experience that you're sort of, left to deal with. It's sort of confounding of how far back everything is. And so, again, for me, the real call to action there is like, keep building. Like, there's so much room to improve. And I think, once we just get more of this technology involved and people really start to like become aware of the progress that can be made by just having like a base layer across everything instead of, again, not to pick on any part of this industry, but there are plenty of people still using fax machines and landlines. It's like we are that dated still. So there's a lot of room for improvement, which is a great opportunity.
Yeah. And I just got back from RESO, and RESO is the organization that I think I look to and I say, wow, this is like the fundamental thing that needs to happen in the space. If you got to have that, you mentioned a second ago, that layer that can
Yeah.
talk to every other system, that is the data dictionary, that is the web API, that's all this standardization. And that is the big critical missing piece, because when you have that, you have so much more innovation and you have people being able to build. Um, what do you think? You mentioned a few things there, fragmentation, outdated systems. What's your take on maybe the political side of it? We don't need to like say any names or like get into that, but what have you felt as a new founder that is an entrepreneur playing in a rather political space? Because I've got, thoughts and my experiences, but what's your thoughts on how
Yeah.
politics play into all this?
Yeah. Very, very good and fair question. I sort of alluded to earlier, I think, and this is, the founder's dilemma or tragedy is you're bright eyed and bushy tailed, time to disrupt this old, stodgy, archaic industry. But the fact is, like, real estate specifically, it has one of the most powerful lobbies. Like, you've got some real big folks that you need to appease in the space. And that doesn't mean that you need to become complacent. That doesn't mean that you need to sort of, throw out your ideas and just find the least common denominator just to get in. But I think it was a humbling part of getting into this industry is that, like, this industry is made up of the people, within it. And it's important to get involved. It's important to learn. And I think, our initial approach with Tori was very disruption, only. Like, we're just focused on disrupting. We feel that there's a way to just carve in and make room for ourselves. And, we certainly shifted gears as we got more experience and became more enlightened to the space, again, without sacrificing, our sort of ethics around it. But I think that was, a really good insight to have early on in the process. And it's very much why what we're building with BHR now, instead of just coming in and saying like, all right, this data is all fragmented, let's make it all for ourselves and, push everybody out. We're approaching this as a collaborative approach. We're going out of our way to try and engage a lot of these larger, more archaic providers in the space and saying, who's excited about the future? Like, we want your expertise. We want to get you involved. And it's been really amazing to sort of see how many people just have readily raised their hands in that space and said, yeah, we're ready for it. And it's not everybody, but you would be surprised at how many. Maybe you won't, because you work with a lot of folks in the space, but I think generally a lot of people would be surprised to see how many of these, 100+ year old companies are like, yes, like, we see a road to the future. We want to stay involved. Like, let's work together on this. So brass tacks, it's been a long journey, but, if anything, I think the learning from it is, you have to be humble about this stuff. You have to come in, and this is an entire industry built on the people who actually are doing the work. And so getting to know those folks, and it has been a really great part of that experience as well.
Yeah, for sure. So let's get into the data that you guys are kind of aggregating, both from MLSs but outside of the MLSs. So we kind of touched on your ability to communicate and get into the MLS space there. It's a slow road. Same with Simba. It's people driven. You got to get in the circles. So we touched on that. But talk about some of the other data points that you're bringing in and providing value for your users. So MLS data you're pulling in, listing data related to these properties. Anything else from the MLS side that you're pulling in?
We were actually really intentional about not starting too much with the MLS data side, only because we understand that MLS data is some of the most widely syndicated data out there. Anybody can go on the internet, go to Zillow, go to Redfin, whatever search platform, what have you, and find that data for themselves. So, we are building a source of truth for all data. So, as you mentioned, we are in conversations with MLSs to bring their data on board because, whilst we probably will not get that data from all 560 MLSs that are out there, there's a lot of, some of those larger consolidated regional players that we want to bring in. But for us, we really started from the idea of like, all right, well, that data is already out there. Like, but there's an immense amount of other information that touches any given address that we want to bring in. So whether that's property valuation, zoning, permits, climate risk, short and long-term rental potential, schools and neighborhood information, census data, ownership history, market trends, liens, everything that touches an address, we are assembling on our platform. And again, like, the high level goal of what we're building at BHR is we want to have somebody be able to answer any question they have about a property in seconds.
Yeah, and you showed me the product, and it's amazing how much data you're pulling together. It's really, really cool, and I think there's a ton of utility there, both for agents but also people outside the space. So who outside of the real estate industry who are selling real estate, who else might get some value from this?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's a great problem to have as a founder, that like, we have interest from so many verticals, both within the industry itself and adjacent to it, as well as just individual consumers. So we have a lot of interest from, as you said, the brokerage and agent side, of course, because what we're building, the way that we've commercialized this data is what we call a real report. So you can go on our site, have access to all this data in this really slick report. Everything's all in one. And I can talk to sort of the AI layer that we've incorporated on that in a bit. But it's really good for agents for diligencing properties, property research, sharing with their clients, building up that goodwill, really helping save time on process and everything. But the same can be said for a lot of other verticals, whether that's on the lending, mortgage origination side, speeding up that process, on the insurance side, for diligencing properties, as well as, SFR and REITs, where it's just, anybody the real pain points that we're solving are, so many of these different providers in these verticals are spending tons and tons of money on large enterprise contracts with low minimums just to get access to data from 12 different sources, and then have to do all of the work to not only go get that data, but assemble it, collate it, and make it actually useful for what they're doing. So huge time and money savings, and process savings overall. And we've had interest from a plot plan company, insurance, title. It's really, when you step back and think about like what's possible if you assemble the entirety or as close as you can get of all real estate data, you know the possibilities are sort of endless. The applications really extend from anything from an auto refinancing mortgage or desktop appraisals, or better diligencing insurance, ESG side of things, or even in the Web3 space, fractionalized ownership. Like, everybody in this space just needs access to data for whatever their use case is. So making that readily available in real time, whether it's just a slice, or you need, maybe an energy company needs 250,000 homes on the East Coast, they need real-time energy usage data. The scale is sort of endless. And for individual consumers, because it was really important to us building this to address that problem, because we've seen in real life what happens when consumers don't have access to this data. Even my co-founder, he was looking to buy a property in California, ended up getting rejected by 10 insurance companies for wildfire risk. And that's information that he didn't have. It's information the sellers didn't have. And, the implications of not having that data, when things come up in a transaction and you didn't know about them, like, it can be pretty severe consequences on the order of, 5 or 6 figures in some cases. So allowing individual consumers to go get this information as well was important to us, because with MLS data, you have to have a realtor's license. Some of that data is just not available to you otherwise. So I do think, while it's not really our focus, we made sure that if you're just anybody sitting around and you want to go learn about a property that you're interested in, you can go on our site and get that report immediately.
Yeah, super powerful. When I looked at it, I thought, from my investment lens, because I invest in properties, I'm like, wow, this is great for diligence for sure. So essentially, the way you can interpret this, and correct me if I'm wrong, you guys are kind of brokering data and building products on top of that data for consumers and professionals to leverage. Is that another fair way to describe what you all are doing?
Yeah.
Now, if that's the case, now let's transition here to AI. What kind of parameters are there around this data that allow you to leverage it and build kind of artificial intelligence with it? Because that's where you all are heading. Talk about kind of where it's going, and how to think about that as a data broker, and how you have to consider these different constituents that are giving you this data to build an AI product.
Yeah, I think we're always interested in new types of technology. I would refrain from saying that we're an AI company versus, we even have some blockchain technology, which I'm happy to talk about as well. But like, we are not defined by the technology stack that we use. We're just opportunistic about what's the right tech to use for different implementations of what we're building. On the AI side, that really came from feedback that we were collecting from, our early users of these real reports. Everybody was saying like, wow, like, I have never seen one encapsulation of all these types of data in one place. Makes it so easy to use. I can just, click through, get whatever I want. Like, people were very impressed by that. But some of the early feedback we got was, oh, wow, like, there's almost too much data. And, again, good problem to have, but we're always just trying to make things easier for people. And so obviously, with the advent of these, incredible language models that are coming out via OpenAI, we were like, okay, there's something really here, because again, we don't just chase the new trend. We want to make sure that the applications actually make sense. And for us, there are plenty of ways you can use something like OpenAI that I think are sort of gimmicky, but the way that we've chosen to do it is, okay, the feedback we got is these reports are too long, or I'm not a data person, I don't want to go look through all this stuff and try and interpret it. But I think, I forgot who said this to us. It may have actually been Bill Fowler. He said, having the data is one thing, and that's a huge problem that I think we've reasonably begun to solve on our side. But knowing what to do with the data is perhaps much more powerful than just having access to it. So For us, AI is really delivering on that second piece of it. So the way that we've done it is in our reports that you can get, there's a little AI copilot at the top, and basically you can query the entire report by just asking a question. So again, saving you time at the level of, you're not going and assembling all of this data, you're not going and collecting all of it, you're not making these contract negotiations, but now you've got it all in one place and you can just start asking it questions. So I can ask, we call our copilot Aiden, and I can say, Aiden, what is the annual short-term rental potential of this property? Click. 2 seconds later, I get a nice narrative format explanation of that. Or tell me the top environmental concerns for this property. Click. Couple seconds, there it goes. Or even something to the effect of, write me a detailed listing description for this property. And Aiden is using all of the data that we've piped in for that specific property and train itself on that, and then delivering you something really, really robust in response. And I think the way to sort of proof that is, if you go to OpenAI and say, what's the annual rental potential of 123 Main Street, it's not going to know, because it doesn't have access to that data. It suffers from the same problem that we had, as builders. That data is just not available. But once you've consolidated all of it and done that work, now you get something much more powerful, because it has that sort of repository to really dig in from. So it's just the beta right now, but we've gotten so much great feedback. And for us, just as, selfishly as a product team, we've made a sample report available on our website, and seeing the kinds of questions that, different real estate professionals or users come to ask, we get to see in real time with sort of an unfettered access of, like, what are people actually interested in? Because that helps us as a product team decide, like, what are we going to build in next? It's been immensely powerful for us as, on the building side, but the feedback we've gotten so far is like, okay, like, I get it. Like, I see where this is headed. And, anybody who's familiar with the way that OpenAI is going to be incorporating all these new plugins with all these other systems, like, start to really step back and say, like, okay, well, what's possible here? Could I, with all this data, this modeling, and maybe access to something like DocuSign, or all, like, writing an offer in seconds, getting even getting suggestions of, like, what kind of offer should I be submitting? Again, at the end of the day, this was not going to replace the agent, but it's going to give an agent so much more power and just brain power, behind all of the decision making they're doing. So very early days. We only released Aiden sort of at the end of March, but very excited about where that's headed.
Yeah, I'm so excited about this new AI movement. With generative AI, I think there's a few things that you get from it, and it seems like you're doing all three. It's generate some kind of intelligent piece of content that is incorporating a ton of data and written in a way that is probably much better than you as a human can do. There's that piece, and then there's search queries. Being able to just query massive amounts of data very quickly and ingest them in a consumable way. And I would say the third one is logic. There is a great logic potential, especially with GPT-4, where you give it a problem to solve and it comes up with a creative solution. That creative solution is oftentimes better or maybe just as good as what you might come up in your brainstorming session as your first idea. And if it's your first idea, then put it into Chat GPT or put it into Aiden and say, let's iterate on this. Give me some other options. Give me a different angle. And that's what's so exciting about this stuff is just the utility of it. We've never seen a technology like this that's just so that has so much utility that's been adopted so fast, and it's just going to compound. To your
Yeah,
point
and I
a
think
second ago.
stepping in the consumer shoes, like, if I can go look at a home, so much of home ownership is reactionary. You buy the place, stuff starts happening to the home, and then you go and fix it. And it's highly emotional, it can be highly costly. And I think there's a lot of ways with all of this data and all of this information, whether it's appliance and maintenance history, like what's the work that's been done on the house, like where does it sit relative to, a toxic release site, like you start to collate all of this, and you've got this layer of AI to help start make some real actionable decisions around, like, what is the real investment into this property look like? You start to really unearth a lot of things that I think can not only just make your life a little more pleasant because you're not reacting when they happen, you've been able to sort of mitigate those problems to begin with, but also empower you to make much more interesting decisions about how to build equity in a home. So again, it just the tip of the iceberg right now, but
Yeah.
we're so excited.
Yeah, and data is the big piece, which is right where you play. An example for me, and then we can move on to the next topic. But example
Sure.
for me, I just bought a condo,
Yeah.
and I aggregated as much data as I possibly could into a Notion doc. Perfectly, it's perfectly structured. Had a great conversations with my agents, with my co-investor, and we're like, here's all the data. Let's go. This is looking good. We've got our financial models. Here's some renovation ideas. We use generative AI for renovation ideas. We could take pictures of a kitchen and use generative AI to say, make it more contemporary and make the cabinets black. We took
Yeah.
pictures of where we would put all the furniture and said, put furniture here with a big screen TV and make it, again, contemporary, make it modern. It did both those things. So we had as much data as we could on the diligence side. We had as much data as we could on the renovation side because it needed renovations. Had it all in an Notion doc. Get to the closing, and the HOA fee was wrong all along. And it's like, well, that was one piece of data that maybe I would have asked about if I had access to that data, or I had some kind of intelligent assistant say something along those lines. When I asked, what's the full all in cost, like you said, of this, it could go query, what's the HOA fee? And it could have seen mismatches somewhere,
Yeah.
and it's like, that's kind of the potential of, while I put in all of this work, I know what I'm doing when I'm looking at these properties. I missed a few things, and here we are at the closing table, and it's wrong. And it's like that kind of thing that AI will catch every single time and frame it to you in the perfect way for you to make the best decision. And that's kind of where this stuff is heading. And I'm looking back and I'm like, man, I wish I kind of had something like BHR. Or are you guys actually, off of that, are you guys pulling in like HOA agreements? Are you able to pull that in any way from either a
Doing some of that. Yeah.
condo's website or something?
Yeah. If the right now we do have like we'll be building in more over the next couple of months, but if there's HOA information available, it's being pulled in.
Yeah, or assessments, like historical
Yeah.
assessment data. That's all open. It has to be open source for people considering buying those properties. So it's like, how do you get access to that? Cool. Yeah, it's so exciting. We could talk about it all day. But next
Yeah.
topic, you mentioned briefly, like there's a big blockchain component to this.
Yep.
I don't want to spend too much time here because I know you all don't spend like a ton of time on this because it's got marketing kind of problems there, and I think you've alluded to that on other podcasts I've listened to.
Yeah.
Touch on like the blockchain piece of this and why it makes sense to start to connect real estate data to the blockchain for maybe utility and less so like consumer adoption.
Yeah, for sure. You know, we were looking at, as technologists, we're always looking at what's going on out there. And I think it's, I'm sure your listeners are savvy, but it's really important to make the distinction between blockchain technology and crypto. Just so that's clear.
Yeah, I almost said Bitcoin because it's just so
No, and
easy to do
it's,
that.
I think the whole space has suffered from poor branding. The Web3 branding sort of pulled in everything and said, okay, this is what this all is. And it's like, well, now we see, how helpful that's been. So back in 2017, right when we were starting Tori, we were like, okay, well, obviously if you think about blockchain as just like, okay, here's a new layer of technology that can help with the durability of data, the verification of data, the extensibility of data. It's like, yes, like, for a big, massive data problem like the real estate industry, it makes a ton of sense. Just wasn't right time, right place. The market hadn't caught up, it just wasn't there yet. But about 2 years ago, when we were really starting to put together our thoughts about BHR, we're like, okay, philosophically, because one of the problems that we've experienced is that this data is both fragmented and sort of, in many cases held hostage by protectionist organizations that really want to maintain the status quo. Philosophically, because we felt it both from a business standpoint as well as the consumer standpoint of seeing what happens when, individual homeowners and buyers don't have access to that data, we were like, this data should not exist in the current paradigm. There's a real call to action to make this data both verifiable and, accessible in real time. So we knew that there was a good application for blockchain with what we were building. The way that sort of started, and this is still part of the stack right now, but there is sort of a consumer end to it where if you are a homeowner, you can come to our site, you can verify that you are an owner of a particular home, and then we'll actually issue you a verified NFT, which you can sort of think of as the key to your digital home record. It basically just authenticates you as the owner and allows you exclusive access to that property where you can add and adjust any of the information about the home. So again, appliance information, maintenance history, stuff that you as the owner probably are the only one who really has insights on. and then give you, privacy control about that record of that home. And there's a cool rewards mechanism in there that as you add data to the network, because we want to incentivize people to do that, you're rewarded and you can use those rewards to buy, real reports and premium data that we have on the platform. So that's live. That sort of NFT layer is there. But these are not digital collectibles. This is not something, and we hold it all custodially. So nobody can go steal your home or anything like that. And then what we did build, it's still in the testnet environment, but we have a end-to-end sort of Oracle solution for hosting all of this data on blockchain and smart contracts. So, because at the end of the day, one of the big issues is that, even if you have all the data in one place, if there's a single point of failure, if those servers go down, if that business goes away, then all of that data is gone. And for us, again, philosophically, there's something really meaningful about whether we exist or not. And I hope that we always do. But if we don't, we're building a path towards being able to create a world where that data exists and can be accessed by anybody who needs it for whatever they're doing, or can build on top of it, at the protocol level. And, because again, like, we want to empower this whole host of new prop tech companies to just build faster, be able to just remove the friction of getting started that we experience and just say, like, whatever you're building, we love it. Like, here's the data you need, go forth, and be merry. So, we have all of that sort of built out where it exists, immutably. There is no single point of failure, faster, et cetera. The only thing that we're still sort of, evaluating is, obviously there are a lot of privacy concerns. If something's hosted on a blockchain, you wouldn't want somebody to be able to go on chain and see, like, oh, here's Evan's most recent inspection report. Looks like his back door's busted. I'm going to go pay him a visit. So there are some ways around that, but we're already able to provide value with sort of a centralized solution. We'll be building both in parallel, but again, philosophically, I think it's really interesting to think about, like, how can we make it so that we are not the sole provider of all of this data in perpetuity? How can we make it so that anybody can have access to it when they need it?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think philosophically, owning as much data as you can about the things you own, your personality, your likeness, your home, these things are things that you should own access to and be able to broker and share with who you want. Now, I don't think is it possible for that to exist? You mentioned like the verification layer of blockchain. That's one of the big utilities of it. Is that possible without a standardized layer that of like something Riso is trying to create? So like, can you verify information without there being a common, data layer? Is that something that will come after Riso, or is that possible before something like Riso takes place?
I think Reso could be really helpful to expediting that process. One of the other ways that we're really approaching what we're building is, we don't want to just have one source of data, for any given vertical or any given data point. Like, when you go and purchase a real report on our site, you'll notice right at the top, we offer you multiple AVMs. Like, it's really important to us as part of what we're doing. This isn't just like make sure a lot of the data is in one place. It's all of the data, because I think AVMs are a really illustrative example. If you go to Zillow, let's say, and you go see the Zestimate, okay, that's how much the Zestimate thinks your property's worth, but what do you really know about the data science and the modeling behind that and the incentives of the company hosting, and building those AVMs? Like, far more interesting to us to assemble the full corpus and give you a more holistic perspective based on multiple different data providers. So I think, same as when a homeowner adds information about their home and says, I just installed this washer, we're not necessarily, if they can send us a photo of that, like, show us the receipts, like, there are ways to validate that, but we're also going to want to be getting that, data and information from the manufacturer, from, the supplier. And over time, when you can sort of point to the full supply chain of, like, any given piece of data, then that starts to become a pretty effective way to say, like, okay, we have reasonable certainty around something like this.
Yeah, that's such a big challenge to pull all that together. So it makes sense you're focusing on some of the more immediate things. Did you start the company as like a blockchain play, or did it start as more of a broader play? Like, did you use blockchain to kind of penetrate the market and go off of that kind of hype that was happening at the time? Or was it always just kind of the current model and blockchain was just a small piece of it? How has that evolved over time?
We it was a great moment in time to sort of flex on that side of things, especially with what we believe is like a real application and a real use case. Because when we came into the market, we almost stopped short of it because it was right at that tipping point where there was a lot of people paying attention, but the grifters and the scams were rampant. And it was one of those things like you don't want to be caught in the storm, but maybe you do a little. I would say that the end result there is, we found a great audience and people within the community, the real builders, like people were very supportive. And I love the Web3 community because it's honestly, very unique insofar as I've never been part of a sort of, digital nomad community that is so supportive about, just the space and uplifting one another. So it's been great to be able to have a small share of voice within that space. That said, I think, we discovered very quickly that, and I think the whole Web3 space is really reckoning with this right now, is that fine to talk about the technology if it's applicable, but really people just want to understand where's the value, what are the products and services using this technology, how are they going to provide value to me. So we very intentionally said, like, all fine and good that we've got this going on. Anybody who's really activated in, within that industry, we can speak to it, of course, but the normal consumer, we don't want to create more friction for them to get involved, and with what we're doing. So rather than them having to come to our site and make a crypto wallet and purchase, a cryptocurrency that they've never interacted with, and then all these volatility, it was just like, use your credit card, like simple little things like that, where we're not forcing consumers, either on the industry end or the individual consumer, to change their normal behaviors. Like, we just want to deliver a great product and service, and the tech that's powering that, all fine and good, but really is going to remain mostly invisible.
Yeah, for sure. Smart. Now let's transition here to the kind of the last section of what I want to talk about, which is building a prop tech company. Talk about, how have you funded the business? How have you approached it? What's the timeline looked like? And what are some challenges along the way? And I probably want to dig in a bit to like the fundraising landscape, but kind of dive into your experience on that front.
Yeah. I'm sure I'm not alone in this, but startups are hard. They're incredibly exciting, and they're hard. It's always a roller coaster. We raised a couple rounds of funding for Tori when we were starting out. That business is still profitable. We've split it off into a separate entity, and it's growing despite the crazy market out there, especially for brokerage. So we were able to seed BHR vis-a-vis Tori to start, but again, now it's a separate entity. And in terms of the landscape in general, I sort of said it earlier. I think prop tech got itself into a pretty tricky, sort of sticky situation where everybody has always known, like, okay, largest asset class, like no brainer, like ripe for disruption, lots of opportunity, tons of money, etc. But I think, a couple key players sort of swallowed up a lot of share of voice and basically, funded a lot of fintech companies that really were not doing anything innovative. They're just sort of reskinning old financial models, many of which I would say at their best only work well in an up market, and at their worst are predatory models, looking for consumers who need fast liquidity because of, situations that they're in, and it just forces them to make bad decisions. So, and I also just think in reality, if I'm being very honest, real estate is not a sexy industry. So at least in the venture capital space, I think it's really suffered from like a couple of those problems of like, not a lot of value delivered, a lot of companies that have just gone under and have not, been performant beyond, the hot markets that they were in when they were sort of at their inception. And it's almost just not a sexy enough problem, because again, not to harp on VCs, but part of the VC world and landscape is, the sort of the one liner, you're at the function, you've got your one liner, like this is the zippy new company. We see it, it was Web3 for a while, it's AI, and real estate, I think, is just, it's a harder problem, and it's not super sexy. So that's all to say that, it's been a challenging landscape to sort of navigate as founders, and we've got a small round that we're opening up, and, should have that closed in the next month or so. But I think we've had to sort of adjust course in saying, we need to find the people who really get the industry and are really passionate about it, not the sort of fair weather friends or bandwagoners that just want to hop onto the newest trend. And honestly, I think that for us at least, that's where we want to be anyways. We want to be working with the folks who really get it. And I think that ends up being, you've got plenty of great firms out there that sort of specialize in the prop tech space. But we've also, got checks coming in from strategic folks who like just actually are in the space as professionals themselves. So challenging, but it really is just about finding your people.
Yeah, I think the VC space is definitely hesitant on the real estate industry, and I think overall the issue the VCs have is there's like a time alignment. It's a mismatch. To
Yeah.
get traction in the real estate industry, it's not an industry where you raise a bunch of VC money and you barge your way in, unless you raise billions like Open Door did. But it's not an industry where a SaaS company can raise a bunch of VC money and barge their way in with just a really clever go-to-market channel or
Yeah.
really clever go-to-market strategy. You've got to take time to build these relationships, and VCs don't align well with that. So traditional VC capital is really tough for prop techs to get. And you're right, you got to kind of start looking for those strategics that have been in the space, know how to take it to market. But even then, it's still a big challenge. And I think one thing I'm curious to see if you've seen or had the same experience is they almost go too far and lean on relationships too far, and they want to like broker everything. Have you run into any consultants or insiders within the industry that ask for a fee for introductions and VC? If you go to somebody and they say, "Hey, I'll help you raise money," but it's a 3% fee or there's some kind of fee on top. Have you run into that?
Few and far between, which I'm happy about because when I've encountered it, I would say that it has not. I have not had the best response to it, to say the
Yeah.
least.
Yeah.
So it's been sparse, fortunately, but I know that stuff's out there. And again, I think the thing that I've really learned is like you have to just sort of shed your ego about it. And like part of being a founder is having a huge ego and like being able to just belligerently march the way that you want. But if it's been, I feel like the more authentic I've been to myself and just knowing how to call a spade. And if something just doesn't feel right, if it's not aligning with just my ethics, like it's probably not the right opportunity. And, we're fortunate to be building a business that doesn't have, it's not affected by the market in the same way that our, other businesses are. Like we're not worried about inflections in the market, supply, interest rates, things like that. Data is always going to have some durability, but so that's just given us the ability to be a bit more, I think, thoughtful about our approach. We've just had to be a little less reactionary to what's going on around us, despite, at the end of the day, if it's a bad market for real estate, it's going to affect everybody no matter what. But short answer to your question, again, few and far between, but I know that stuff's out there. And, at a certain point, beggars can't be choosers, but we've been in a position, fortunately, to take our time and really find the right people in the
Yep.
right ways.
Love it. Cool. Last question here. What gets you excited about the future of the real estate industry? I'm sure you've mentioned, bits and pieces here and there, but when you look out 5, 10 years, what's your vision? What gets you really excited?
Um, Selfishly, I'm excited for things like what we're building to really come to fruition because, again, I'm a real part this was built out of our experience not being able to build as a young prop tech startup. And that, we're solving that challenge. And the hope is that it's a transferable, utility to anybody who wants to build, whether they're a small company or whether they're a large company, it doesn't matter. But I think we're reaching this breaking point where something's got to give. Like the industry needs to be able to move faster, and I don't think it's going to happen just with the flick of the light switch. But I'm hopeful that solutions like ours and others that are sort of addressing these systemic problems within the industry will really start to catch fire and start making a meaningful difference in terms of like how fast people can build, and just really empower that next layer of efficiency for what already exists, but also the new ideas and the new businesses on top that are just starting to really, catch some steam as well. I think one vertical that I really, really like and feel passionate about is sort of the fractionalized ownership space, because uh, whether it's sort of on the Web3 side, because I know there's a lot of great teams out there doing that, or not, as a millennial, sort of fed this whole idea for years and years and years of like, generational wealth vis-a-vis property ownership. That was it. And this generation's gotten its fair share of flack and poor timing. And I think in the reality, what we're seeing now is that home ownership is not guaranteed for everyone, and that's becoming a smaller and smaller slice for people to actually be able to own that whole asset outright. So creating new pathways for anybody, but especially more marginalized communities to be able to participate in this, durable, stable asset class, I think is really, really important. So that's just one sort of cherry picked vertical that I think is really compelling. And, there's so much good that can be done there.
Yeah, I think I align with you a lot. I think we got to keep pressure on the industry and the data players, the MLSs, the MLS execs, everybody, all the prop techs. We've got to keep pressure on this thing to keep moving forward faster. And, that's going to take time, but the more pressure we apply, the faster it will go. So that's really important. But also, I'm right there with you. I'm 27. A lot of my friends are trying to buy homes, and the affordability is tough. And I think the more we can do on the affordability front and allow access to these critical assets that traditionally the American dream has been built on, we need to make efforts on that front. I think fractional homeownership's one. I think there's other interesting models like Divvy Homes that
Yep.
are doing kind of the rent to own model. I think if you do that responsibly, that's an interesting model. There's all kinds of things popping up, and I think as time goes on, and hopefully the supply problem gets fixed over time. But I think you kind of got to bet on the fact that it's always going to be a struggle from this point forward to have affordable access to homes. I think it's a problem we got to put some pressure on too for the industry to try to solve. And you know what? A lot of that comes back to data too. The
Yep.
better the data, the more you can try to drive affordable housing in certain regions. Where are people wanting to buy? Where are people not buying? What can we do to make these areas more affordable? That all comes back to data. So I think we just got to keep the pressure on them. So thanks for coming on the podcast. It's been a great
Sure.
conversation. Love to do it again soon. I love the insights you have and what you're building. So thanks.
Yeah. And thank you so much for your time, Evan. This has been great.
All right, cool. We'll